Good morning and welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Neota Igbe.
What a Friday morning it is here in the Federal Capital Territory. It's rainy in some parts. It's also wet in some other parts. I'm not complaining. I'm just happy to see Friday, aren't you? Good morning and welcome. I'm Maokwe Yusuf.
Very much so, Maokwe. Well, it's dry and cool here in Lagos, and we're grateful for Friday as well. Good morning and welcome. I am Bukola Koka.
Well, let's end your week with a bang, a good bang, right? Welcome to Lagos. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. If you're conversant with social media, if you follow up with the news very well, you may have seen a certain trend on Twitter about 5.5 trillion naira. But I mean, the story didn't emanate from Twitter. It emanated from the FIRS. In fact, the head of the FIRS was at the State House yesterday to, brief newsmen, first speak to the National Economic Council, and then eventually briefed newsmen. And that's where the 5.5 trillion naira came out from. So let's tell you this morning that the Federal Inland Revenue Service, that's Nigeria's simply put tax collector, essentially, raked in 5.5 trillion naira in the first 6 months of this year. I mean, 5.5 trillion naira for a lot of people might just sound like, okay, it's just a little of the budget which we have planned for this year, right, over 20 trillion naira. But when you look closely at it, there are lots of issues raised. First, the target for this, half year was about 5.3 trillion. That was a target for the FIRS. So essentially they shattered that target by an extra, 0.2 trillion naira. At a time when the country says we need all of the revenue we can get, this what might be good news, but then there are other questions to raise. Yes, fantastic. Some have asked, some are curious about the timing of this. For some people, maybe it might be targeted at something particularly. You understand how these things go. People have their different perspectives. New government is in town. Is the FIRS showing off? But we'll stick with the figures this morning. Let's let the data speak. I mean, just a quick visit to the FIRS's website, because I think a lot of Nigerians should be curious about how much comes into the coffers of the country, because it is your money, it is my money, essentially, from oil revenues and non-oil revenues. And I saw that the last time the FIRS put out figures was in 2021. So I was a bit curious as to, okay, how did we leap? We didn't perform too well in 2021, by the way. But for 2022, we didn't also perform as well as we ought to have performed. So all of a sudden, 2023, first 6 months, 5.5 trillion naira. Fantastic news, but hey, it is still it's still a far cry from what we need, because we'll still have to finance our budget from borrowings. But a way to go. How do we improve upon this? A lot of people don't want to hear it, but hey, we need to improve on our taxes, definitely, Bukola.
Yes, indeed, Kade. And, it's unsurprising for Nigerians to jump on the bandwagon of this and to cause it to trend, particularly because Nigerians would be, concerned about where the money for the palliatives will come from following the continuous increase in the pump price of fuel, and when these palliatives will come in the first place. So if we have this much potential, let's go back to the figures, by the way. For non-oil tax collection, it stood at 3.76 trillion naira as against a target of 2.98 trillion naira. And for crude oil collection, that's about 1.65 trillion naira, if I'm not mistaken. And this is from the first 6 months of the year, without the commencement, I believe, of the tax reforms of this administration. So that's a lot of potential there, and that's a huge, sum from the 2023 Appropriation Act. If you measure, what this amounts to out of a total of over 20 trillion naira budget, that's a huge sum. So, and that can go around, to cover for some projects and perhaps even the palliatives. But how can we now build upon this? As Kadi has said, the administration has said that they're not taxing Nigerians, they're taxing prosperity rather than, the poor. And they are going to look at all the other areas where they can, cover the loopholes of tax collection, check corruption, and ensure effective collection. So there's a lot of potential there. Perhaps if we can back this up with buying Nigeria, making Nigeria, and making what we produce, we can also, cause this to go as high as maybe 7 trillion, 8 trillion, and that will reduce that appetite for borrowing to fund the budget. This is
fantastic point you made there, really. I mean, let's make in Nigeria first. The conversation we had yesterday was about prohibiting, ban this, ban that, and all of that. But we need to encourage production, because you see that the non-oil sector actually did better than the oil sector. So, I mean, it speaks to the point, we need to actually focus on improving production in Nigeria, because if we got, what, 3.76 trillion naira compared to the 2.9 that we were meant to get. For the oil sector, we actually got less than our target.
Less than
2.03 trillion compared to the 2.3 trillion that we're meant to get. So I think that point is where we should pitch our tent with this morning, encourage production.
And just to wrap up the point, and for the work of the Federal Inland Revenue Service and the Ministry of Finance that seeks to commence these reforms, there are oil tankers, on the sea avoiding Nigeria as a result of years of uncollected tax. Perhaps that's the place to begin with the tax reforms and ensure that, that 9-year unremitted tax, uncollected tax, will come back home and, go to some projects that will help Nigerians, particularly the poor. Makwe and Neota.
That, apart from adding our voices to yours, that whatever it is that is collected trickles down to, for the general benefit of the country. It's not money that should be looted. First and foremost, there's a theory that when people pay taxes, they tend to take a little more interest in what is happening in government. Unlike before now that we used to complain about, government is not doing much. But, it's almost been like I say, well, you mind your business, government. After all, majority of the funds that you were getting were from a resource that we didn't understand how it was produced or how it worked, which was the crude oil resource. But right now, it does appear that government now knows. Well, they've been mouthing it for a while, but they've been a bit more serious about it in recent years, about diversifying our non-oil revenue, and taxation has been one of them. We've been cited as one of the countries where our tax to GDP ratios is a bit low. So the question is, what was government going to do about that? Was it going to increase taxes for those who were already paying tax, or was it going to seek to widen the net? And I think that's where I'm a bit concerned. Yes, it is good that the FIRS has, smashed its targets. It's trying to do well in that particular area. But I do know also that there have been concerns in recent times about the tactics that the FIRS uses in pushing or getting some of these figures. No, the federal government hasn't exactly increased tax in recent times, apart from the VAT, which has been a bit controversial. But sometimes it will seem that the FIRS will simply slam taxes on companies and then tell you to come and justify why you should not be paying that much tax that they have slammed on you. That's basically, that's what a lot of companies have been complaining about. So you find them, going to FIRS offices, many million times trying to resolve what those figures ought to be. And oftentimes these things are figures that are, I don't know how they conjure them up, but these are some of the complaints. Well, the president recently appointed Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, someone who should know and, has great experience in that tax area, about, seeing how we can get our tax reform in such a way that, companies are happy, individuals are happy, and government too is happy. So while we take a little more interest, and FIRS, rests on its bragging rights as to how it goes about, smashing its targets, I think that we all now can take a little more closer look at how that money is spent, knowing that it is coming from our pockets. Government knows that when you begin to tell the people to pay something from their pockets, from their profits, from their prosperity, that's what they say they're taxing, that they suddenly will be taking a little more interest in terms of how you're spending their money. And trust me, in these times when things are biting everyone, they certainly will be looking forward to see just what sacrifices government is making and how that money is trickling down to providing services that the people are in dire need of. Nyota.
Well, Margaret, and I hope I will not get shot by the time I'm done saying what I'm about to say. So I look at the...
You have protection. You're protected
I'm
here.
shielded, right? Okay, so I'm looking at the... I do know that when the Federal Inland Revenue Service collects all these taxes, there are different parts to it. The money is used in different areas to handle different things and different institutions. There's also the part that is used to run the institution itself. So when they say we realize this amount of money, a portion of it goes back to run the institution and run other institutions. But just look at the whole figure and see this. So in 2022, the FIRS said they made about 10.1 trillion naira. Mm-hmm. Now, for the Nigerian out there who's hearing these figures, like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of money. And then you see that the budget for 2022 was 17.1 thereabouts trillion naira. So someone say, oh, we're done. I mean, but it's almost completely funded and all of that. But so when you hear these figures, again, people get excited because there is no explanation, so to speak. I mean, it's not broken down to the man out there who is wondering, I mean, if FIRS can make this amount of money from taxes alone, why do we really need to go out borrowing? There's money out there. We are paying the taxes. So let's see how our taxes come back to work for us, simply because nobody is letting them know that, hey, of that tax you're all being excited about that has been collected, this portion goes for this portion goes for that. A breakdown of the monies, the revenue generated and how it's expended will make things a lot easier. Permit me to borrow a leaf from something here. Yesterday, the NJC, I think, came out to refute a story in the public space that one of the justices had resigned. They came out to say that it's not true, that there's nothing like that. Again, they say they say there's no smoke without fire, right? When there's no information put out there, when it's not clear, when you're not communicating clearly to the people, what happens is you give room for speculations. So my advice would be that let the government speak clearly and state clearly what it is that is happening around or what it is that they are doing. If FIRS has come up to say that in the space of 6 months, I'm not sure you looked at the details clearly. In June alone, of that 5.5 trillion naira, 1.65 was recovered was brought in June alone. And according to the statement that was released, that's the highest ever, I'm trying to find the words, generated by the institution in 1 month alone. In this month of June, when the subsidy was removed, in this month of June, when everything cost of everything practically skyrocketed, that's when the FIRS raked in 1.65 trillion naira. Tells me something. There is potential in this country, but there's also the need for proper and effective communication to the people that are being led to say, this is what is happening, this is where we're going, that's where we are headed to, and this is how we're going to get there. If that is not done, what you'll just be doing is people will just be stewing, upset that they are not seeing where their money is going to. I mean, I do know that what that said when they pay the taxes, yes, you said it, when they pay taxes, they'll pay more attention to what is being done with their money. You tell people to pay their taxes, and guess what? In that statement, it says it is caused by improved voluntary tax compliance. So it tells again that the Nigerian is willing to do his own part. But how willing is the government to do its own part? How willing are those in public service who are there to lead the Nigerians? How willing are they to do their own part in rendering service so that the Nigerian can willingly and joyfully, if I may borrow that word, bring forth his own side, which is paying his taxes, because he is sure that he will see the effects of the tax paid. Well, we'll be back in a moment to look at what the papers are saying. Just stay with us. Okay. And we're starting out with Daily Trust newspaper, simply because it's about the people. It says, fuel at 617 naira per litre. That's what they're leading with. Residents desert streets in states. Workers shun offices. Artisans lament low patronage. States to share palliatives using own register. That's National Economic Council. That was coming from that meeting yesterday. And Nigerian Union of Local Government Employees, as NOLGE, demands 300% salary increment. FG insensitive, wicked labor unions. You'll find more from page 4 to page 26. But look at the pictures. Oh boy. Okay. I won't say much there. FAC shares 907 billion naira, saves 1 trillion naira in external reserve. That's on page 7. You get more details on that. And then below that blue strip there, you see some pockets of stories. Kanu Disco gets new owners as Kaduna faces license revocation. Iraq cuts ties with Syrian over Quran desecration. Kanu CP leads raid on Dala Hill, vows to deal with criminals.
But the lead story is quite interesting, Nota. I could tell you yesterday on my way to work, in fact, for the last 2 days, I've been asking, was there a public holiday declared? And I wasn't aware.
True.
You know, the roads have been quite empty, and I think it's quite telling. You have to ask, is it that people are doing their meetings or their work virtually now, or what?
I do know, I hear that in some states, they've already decided to go to work twice a day or 3 times a week, rather, just to cut down on costs. I mean, if you cut down on costs of going to work, it's now up to you to decide on the others, all your different movements, how you're going to cut down on those movements. Thank God for the GSMs now. Cell phones, you can make your calls, and video calls can even help reduce the cost of movement. If you do more video calls, I mean, I want to see Mark, how are you doing? I just do a video call. You see where Mark is and how she's doing. It makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, but businesses are going to suffer. The businesses that, do a lot of socials. I mean, whose business is focused around social gatherings, friends meeting up friends, meetings happening in person, etc. Those kinds of meetings, those kinds of businesses will certainly be feeling the pinch at this time. Yes, sir.
But above that, there, just below the nameplate, aviation fuel contamination raises air safety concerns. That's another side that nobody is looking at. Would the flight tickets go up as well because fuel subsidies are removed? Meanwhile, that sector had been somewhat deregulated long before now. So would the flight tickets change? Again, we'll check. Reps rejects planned electricity tariff hike to probe excess crude account. Page 19, and 11 APC governors visited Adamu, urge ex-chair to continue to support party. And that's it from Daily Trust.
Well, let's take a look at New Telegraph for you. And they're focusing on the NEC meeting, which happened yesterday. Their lead story goes, NEC censures Buhari Social Investment Register, says it lacks integrity, urges states to give cash transfers to workers as palliatives, says only 900 billion naira shared by FAC as June allocation. Senate targets bitumen to diversify economy, catalyze development. So quite a telling meeting from the National Economic Council yesterday. We'll be focusing a bit more on it much later in the program. But indeed, the cash transfer register, which had been controversial all along, which the Buhari government had relied upon to distribute funds to the most vulnerable in society, was one of the things that came up for discussion at NEC yesterday. So you might want to view details on pages 2 and 28 of the paper. You also have a number of other stories right there. Fuel price hike, residents trek, drivers lament low patronage. Federal government opens workshops for vehicle conversion to auto gas. Petroleum product distributors oppose petrol loading fee hike. That's also there. And just in case people are thinking of being mischievous, read this one. Insecurity, military activates war mode nationwide. Vows to crush terrorists, other criminal elements. Zamfara needs federal government intervention. Security agencies know those behind unknown gunmen. That's according to IPOB. Clark, Adebanjo, Hogu, others identify causes of lingering insecurity. You also have a number of other stories on the corner there talking about politics. On top of the nameplate there, pension. Workers transfer 131.785 billion naira to new fund managers. So don't forget, if you're dissatisfied with your pension fund manager, you can always transfer. It's your money, okay? If you're unhappy, if their interest rates are not good, if they're not investing it properly, well, the choice is yours. Let's leave it there for New Telegraph.
And turn to this Nigeria, which also trails on the outcome of the NEC meeting yesterday with the review of the palliatives. But it seems to give a bit of some interpretation to what NEC has done. Listen to this. Conditional cash transfer. NEC discards Buhari's social register over integrity issues. Says criteria for compilation unclear. Adopts new method of cash transfer. States to come up with registers using formal, informal means. So that leaves a huge question mark on the conditional cash transfer program under the former administration, for which a lot of questions have been asked about who got the 5,000 naira, where there are account numbers, there are BVN numbers for crying out loud, which should enable us trace to ensure that indeed Nigerians got the money. So should there be a probe, Kayode?
Well, it looks like this process of going through it is some sort of probe, whether or not there will be consequences if we see or we find out that where there was some sort of fraud is another question entirely.
It's another question entirely. It also speaks to, the synergy, or will it be preparation now of the new administration for the palliatives program? Recall that the former administration initially even wanted to distribute, money from the $800 million World Bank loan. So if we're not quite clear about the way to go with this now, it speaks a lot to that. But let's take a look at other stories. Right under the headline, you find this one. APC that's governors, were collaborating with federal government on palliatives. And if you go above the nameplate, as a consequence to all of what you're experiencing, the entire nation is going through, rising cost of living impacting on poverty, production index that's ascribed to the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association and NECA. And, that just leaves very little to the imagination. What will small-scale businesses be going through right now that depend on fuel, to fund their businesses? If there's no power supply, if there is power supply, they have to pay a lot for less, and then they have to, access raw materials if they are into any form of processing, so a lot of challenges there. Let us know what you're going through. Let's leave it there for this Nigeria.
Well, The Guardian takes a departure from, the trend, if I could say that, this morning with its big story. It's a Friday, so perhaps this will hit home more. Hajj 2023. Tears, complaints trail Nigeria's 304 billion naira capital flight to Mecca. It's big story, The Guardian's big story this morning, and says that an average of 3.2 million naira, 95,000 pilgrim quota allotted to Nigeria cost 304 billion naira in capital flight. And I think this is a very interesting debate, really. For some, it's a religious quota, really, that you have to meet. For some others, they see it as tourism. And I know that debate has been on for a long, long time. But this is speaking to the figures now. 304 billion naira capital flight to Mecca. So that's The Guardian's big story this morning. And you see that one in red. With 1 week left, Tinubu's ministerial list fails to surface at Senate. You wonder what's going on with that one. More importantly, how that will affect the reality of Nigerians, really. If ministers are announced, we hope they know there's a lot of work to be done beyond all of the congratulations and the bow and go. And just one more for you. You've seen this across board, but just to mention again, NEC jettisons Buhari's social register over integrity concerns. And for me, what hurts more is clearly that register cannot be used immediately anymore. So if a lot of Nigerians were hoping that there will be succor immediately as a result of the palliatives, which are expected to be given out using this register, clearly that cannot happen immediately anymore if they have to, scrutinize that register.
Precisely, Kayode. That means Nigerians have, to wait a lot more before, they can be clear on the approach to go about in administering the palliatives.
Indeed. But that's The Guardian for you this morning.
The Vanguard newspaper is what we go on to next, and they have that story there. Palliatives, Buhari's social register lacks credibility. That's coming from NEC. It continues on page 5. But let's go down below the picture there to see this other one. DHQ activates war mode against terror as the military kills 23. That's on page 7. I understand the defense headquarters has decided that no more pussyfooting around any of this. We go out all out and we'll get it done. Let's hope that we'll see effective results going forward. I mean, in terms of security and protecting the nation's integrity, all of that. But above the nameplate, court orders DSS to grant Kanu access to his doctor, medical records, and then reps ask NERC to stop increase in electricity tariff. It's on page 9. Politics there. Chairmanship replacing Adamu with Ganduje, political suicide. Coming from Lukman, APC vice chair. You find more of that on page 4. Well, let's see, Mr. and Mrs. Friday, so let's just relax a little bit, Mark. Mrs. says, you knew about my job before you married me. You knew how demanding journalism is. So tell me, what's the fuss about? I say, what's the fuss about? And then he says, I don't talk to the press.
Better not. better to be safe than sorry.
I don't talk to the press, because when you're done talking to the press, you come and talk to the press. And that's it from the Vanguard.
Well, Leadership Friday is the next one. I'm looking up for you now. NAS committee's intrigues, horse trading as presidency hijacks process. Senators, reps shun Akpabio Abbas, lobby presidential aid. Okay, that's quite interesting. Page 4 is where you find details. Lagos senators, reps, now power brokers. Senate, House, keep mom. Mom's the word. Not dad, mom.
Mom's the word.
Mom's the word. You have a number of other stories at the bottom here. Well, but this is quite troubling, really. If this is truly the situation, NAS committee's intrigues, horse trading as presidency hijacks process, and there needs to be, some concern. Why should or how come the presidency? Well, maybe that's not the question to ask us. It's very clear how come the presidency has that much influence in the National Assembly, but it speaks again to separation of powers. What eventually happens if the presidency is now indirectly in control of the National Assembly? Very big questions to be asked there. But if you look at the bottom here, they have a number of stories. Fuel price hike cripples police activities in FCT. So looks like residents are not the only ones parking their vehicles. The police that should be patrolling as well, looks like they too would have no fuel to patrol. But the big question we should ask is, if the criminals have fuel to patrol, the police cannot sit down and say they don't have fuel. The tiger in the Inspector General has to come out right now. The tiger and the lion that he says is roaring to go, needs to come out and see how they can provide
Tiger and the
petrol and fuel in the vehicles of police officers so that they can move around and see what's happening in different parts of the FCT.
Since tigers and lions, they really need vehicles. They can move as quickly as...
No. Come on, was talking. It was the IG who was speaking for himself. Well, you have a number of other stories there. Abduction of Odinga's bodyguard rattles Kenya's opposition. It's a page 10 read for you there. And again, the Senate continues to emphasize they're yet to receive ministerial list. As you see there, we're yet to receive ministerial list. That's according to the Senate. National Chairman, crisis brews in APC over choice of Ganduje. That is also right there for you. And just in case you're interested in the back page, conversation with Azu is right there. Why Museveni's video shames Africa. A very interesting read on something that happened, African leaders on their way to Libya and then being turned back by NATO forces at the airport. Big questions as to whether Africans really have any, supremacy on their own soil if they can be turned back by NATO officials. Well, that story, or let's say the conversation with Azu, has all of the juicy details for you. Let's leave it there for Leadership Friday.
And turn very quickly to the Daily Times of Nigeria, which also chooses to tour a different path from much of what has dominated the headlines on the other papers. Listen to this. Rep opens can of worms on CBN's handling of excess crude monies. That's huge. But listen to the riders. Reports revealed unapproved, indiscriminate withdrawals from excess crude account. Consistently rebuffed inquiries by Auditor General of the Federation. Huge sums missing. And it goes on to say that the House of Reps has resolved to investigate how the CBN handled the excess crude monies. Well, it looks also as if that will go back to, the immediate past administration.
Where is the former Minister of Finance in all of this, really? Because I recall that in previous administrations, it was the Minister of Finance that championed, if I was Dr. Ngozi Konjo-Iweala, that actually essentially championed all of this. So there's a major role for the former minister in all of this as well, I imagine.
And the former minister, from the look of things, has a lot of questions to answer on other, outcomes of the management of the nation's finances in other areas. We could go on and on, but let's look at other stories. Take a look, listen to this one, right under the big story, $155 million National Mass Meeting Program. National Mass Meeting Program.
Or metering.
Metering program. Senate asks FG to suspend TCN's unpatriotic World Bank tender. And under that, you find this one as well. Ministerial list, nothing from presidency yet. The suspense is really biting harder on Nigerians. And it was interesting to also see the Senate president teasing even members on the floor of the Senate yesterday. Let's leave it there for the Daily Times.
Nigeria News Direct leads with subsidy palliatives. The NEC discards Buhari's National Social Register. It's something that is definitely big this morning. A host of riders will let you just go through that so you can get a feel of the angle Nigeria News Direct is taking this one from. And you see, NAF airstrikes eliminate 22 terrorists loyal to late kingpin Abdul Karim. So in case you're wondering what that is about as well, pick a copy of the Nigerian News Direct. This is a couple more stories. Tributes continue for Prince Samuel Ibiyemi, the publisher of Nigerian News Direct, who passed on recently. Well, let's leave it there for the Nigerian News Direct this morning. So we'll take a moment. We have a whole lot for you on the program this morning. We're beginning with the National Economic Council's talk about the palliatives, what will be done, how different it will be, the social register. It's really a lot, and you do not want to miss any part of this.
Amid the smiles and pleasantries shared by the members of the National Economic Council lies a quiet storm, one that has racked the brains of these governors and Nigerians across the country. How to ensure Nigerians do not break under the weight of the removal of fuel subsidy and the unified exchange rate policy. After the much-needed prayers said by the Osun State Governor, the media is excused for the meeting to begin. 6 hours later, a contingent of governors and the acting chairman of the CBN brief on the resolutions of the council, beginning with the highly speculated cash transfer program.
We didn't sit down there to begin to say, oh, okay, this one, your cash transfer will be like what is being bandied in the media, whether it's 8,000 or 10,000 or 1,000 or whatever. It will depend on what the state, if the state can afford it, and what they can afford.
He goes further to explain that the National Economic Council has questioned the integrity of state social registers and why an integrity test is necessary.
There was almost near unanimity among members that there is a big question mark about the integrity of the so-called National Social Register. The integrity test is what is missing with that register. Many have described what is being counted as National Register as either bogus. Some describe it as phantom. Some describe it as all manner of terms. So we need to face the problem, the fact that we don't have a credible register. and get back to work on this.
Council says they're seeking to create a balance between investment and consumption so as not to just pump money into the economy at the risk of higher inflation. The consensus is a need to invest more in infrastructure, especially roads. Meanwhile, the Bauchi State Governor, Bala Mohammed, says food items will also be distributed to the states.
We have some buffer stock that is already there with NEMA, and the Council has directed the states will be allocated immediately substantial portion of food items, grains, and so on and so forth for distribution so that the prices of foodstuff will come down and it will be given at a subsidized rate or at the rate at which it is acquired from NEMA because it is free.
Targets surpassed by the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Anticipated wage increase for civil servants, as well as a cash award policy for them and the payment of outstanding liabilities. Funding MSMEs with single-digit interest rates and the implementation of energy transition by state governments are also preferred by the Council. In the meantime, the promise of compressed natural gas-run buses by oil marketers is addressed by the Governor of Ogun State.
They decided that they were going to buy the vehicles that are locally made. They were not interested in bringing in vehicles from outside the country because they felt that this will also at least help in terms of employment generation. And I believe that the problems they're having right now is that the supplier, the local supplier of the vehicle, has not been able to live up to the expectations. But I'm sure that they are still deeply committed to ensuring that they supply the vehicles.
A lot of the things that we've heard from the National Economic Council after this meeting has raised a lot of questions and basically puts a lot of the decisions in the hands of government officials. The cash transfer program has to be done at the state levels based on their capacity. The social register at the state levels also have to be compiled by government officials at that level. Cutting down the cost of governance also has to be at the whims and caprices of government officials. Now, while these may raise a lot of questions, the National Economic Council wants Nigerians to believe that ultimately, if these rules are carried out, that prosperity will be abundant for all, asking all Nigerians to be patient in the face of the crisis they're facing as a result of these government policies. From the State House in Abuja, Kayla Megwa, Channels Television News.
Welcome back, and we start out, before we start getting to the conversation proper, and there's this one that just needs just in, rather, has it that there's an outbreak of diphtheria in Kaduna, has killed 6, and 12 are in the hospital as we speak. And then also, just coming in from, you have it there, 6 killed by diphtheria in Kaduna and 12 hospitalized. We all just need to be a little bit more careful. And while we're being security conscious, we should also be health conscious as well. Also in Taraba State, an outbreak just in has it that anthrax outbreak. The government is raising alarm over possible outbreak of anthrax in the state, but is setting up a machinery for surveillance, warning health personnel not to be complicit in this. That's also in, apart from the outbreak of diphtheria in Kaduna, there's also the outbreak of, possible outbreak of anthrax in Taraba State.
So I think people really need to be careful about diphtheria because some of the symptoms will seem like you're about to come down with a cold. I would see here includes sore throat, fever, swollen lymph nodes, and weakness, which we oftentimes put down to malaria, especially in this season that the weather is cold. People are subject to sore throat, etc., weakness, thereabout. But please go to the hospital. If, you experience some of these symptoms, sore throat, fever, swollen lymph nodes, and weakness, it just might be something else. It might be, and sometimes you also have rashes or ulcers, noisy breathing or shortness of breath. It might not be malaria. It might be another illness, which we now hear is diphtheria. And, you know, the symptoms are all very, very similar, but please do not take it for granted. Do go to a hospital, please. And anthrax looks like it's now left Suleja. That's initially was just a farm in Niger State.
So I was just Googling the symptoms of anthrax, just so that also we're careful as well. Fever and chills, chest discomfort, shortness of breath, confusion or dizziness, cough, nausea, vomiting and stomach pains, headaches, sweat. But basically, at the end of the day, the whole idea is do not self-medicate. Go see a professional and get checked and tested. But, you know, in the midst of all of that, also be careful around your environment, where you are, wherever you're going to. As I say, if you stay at home, you find out that some of the risks about the risk of catching some of these things are also minimized as much as possible.
And even to the professionals, I do hope that they will have other suspicions other than malaria, because oftentimes when you report some of these symptoms, even without carrying out a test sometimes, they will reach a conclusion. So now that these other diseases are out there, I hope that they will also have a high suspicion level of some of the symptoms that patients will present before them before reaching conclusions that it could be malaria or anything of the sort. Yeah.
All right, so health warning, we also have security warnings as well. Be careful where you are, know your environment, know the people around you. But let's come down and look at post-subsidy removal warnings here, and now that the NEC has had its conversation, as the National Economic Council has had its conversation, and they've come up with some things. They've come up with a unanimous agreement on the disbursement of palliatives, and in what mode and how they will come, when they will come. They say it's tied to the social register of both the national and states, howbeit after examination. But we have in the studio to help us look at the outcome of the National Economic Council meetings in the studio here in Abuja, Professor Ikechukwu, who is the Executive Director, Development Specs Academy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Also here in our Abuja studio is Ayobami Oyalowo, who is a development economist and a member of the All Progressives Congress. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning.
Joining us virtually is a senior economist, SPM professionals. We're expecting Paul Alaje to join us in a bit. He will join us virtually from Ibadan. But let's start off here in Abuja with Professor Ikechukwu and Oyalowo, Mr. Oyalowo. So, gentlemen, you heard the news, the outcome of that meeting of the National Economic Council meeting. So let's get, first of all, how did you get the news? How did you take the news? First of all, let me start with you, Bami. The National Social Register was something that was touted and spoken about a great deal by the last administration. But the NEC gets up to say that that social register needs to be looked at again. It lacks integrity. If we borrow the words from the front page of the Vanguard, it lacks integrity. So,
good morning once again. I wasn't that surprised, really, because for many of us, even though we are members of the party, we thought the last people who handled the social investment program did not do a good job, especially during the second term. We thought it was better handled initially when the vice president office handled it in the first term of 2015 to 2019. But when it was moved to the ministry, I personally thought, I still believe that the government minister lacks what it takes to really run the program. I mean, initially, we were very proud of the N-Power, the conditional cash transfers as was being handled from the office of the vice president. But yes, we know it was necessary for it to be put in a situation where it's not an ad hoc thing. So yes, it was to be institutionalized. But I thought the person that was selected to handle the job was not up to par. And we all saw some of the nonsense we heard, especially during the COVID, that she purported to have done. I still think somebody needs to call her to order. Somebody needs to question some of the things that we heard she did. So I am not too surprised that the NEC has come out to say it lacks integrity. Unfortunately, they are calling Buhari's name now, which makes me a bit sad because I know Buhari, as a person, as the former president, meant well. He meant well. He meant well for Nigeria. He is never short of integrity. Unfortunately, maybe some people whom he trusted decided to play over his trust on them. So I'm glad that the NEC is saying this, and I hope when the new registers are displayed, because now we're looking at both federal and state registers, I hope we will understand the criteria that will be used to handle and to compile such register, because clearly Nigerians need this palliative. Clearly, it's a good program. Clearly, it is something that is done worldwide. But there must be integrity. At least when you're doing social sciences, you can't make it like a full science where it is 99%, but you must have at least 95% integrity in that register. So that is what I am looking forward to, so that when we begin to talk about the palliative, the cash transfers and so, we will not have so much argument like we had in the past. We will not have people impugning on the integrity of the president like it was done on the innocent President Buhari because of
innocent President Buhari.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's a new one.
innocent President Buhari. He was president. I mean,
well, you see, the thing about presidency, let me give you an example.
Stops us in stable.
You sit here and the man who owns this place or who is the MD does not necessarily sit down and teleguide you. He thinks he should be able to do what is right. I think that was what Buhari did. He put people there hoping they will do what is right.
When indeed people don't do what is right,
but did you hear what I just said? I expect that the woman should be called to question now that the government has gone in. For me, that should be the right thing to do.
I mean, but please, let's not use the word innocent.
So you think President Buhari is not innocent?
President Buhari was the person,
that's your opinion.
Nigerians
My
voted.
opinion is that President Buhari is
he was the president for
opinion.
the 8 years, for a duration of 8 years.
But honestly,
and I think that whether his ministers did well or they didn't do well, he takes both takes both the credit and he takes both the failures that his, whatever it is that his minister, however it is that his ministers performed. But let me come to you, Prof. I saw that you were stifling a laughter while he was speaking.
That was because I said innocent President Buhari.
No, even before you said innocent President Buhari, there are a number of things which you said, and I saw Prof really struggling to hold back his laughter. But Prof, it does appear that the surgery, we've been told about this famous surgery that needed to be done, and right now it does appear that the patient is bleeding out. People are saying, 617. This is the first time we're actually seeing that, when they tell you that subsidy has been removed, oftentimes it's not when they remove the initial subsidy. It is whether they would actually let market forces operate when push comes to shove, especially if the prices are going to go up. And this is what we're seeing. From, at least let me speak for the figures we know here in Abuja, from a relative 540 to 617 or 620, as the case might be. That's quite a hike.
It is.
And a lot of people are feeling the pinch. So right now, big questions to ask us. The first, do you think that people really understood what deregulation meant from the reactions that we can see, to this price hike first? Do you think that people really understood? Or is it that we're not prepared for this level of hikes?
Can I backtrack a little and come forward on the earlier issue raised? I don't want to talk about spending 254 billion to feed children who were not in school. I was concerned about the innocence of the former president. I'm the principal of a school. Teachers are employed. There are processes there to prepare their notes, their lesson notes. Lesson notes get inspected. Then they teach, and you do monitoring and evaluation to ensure the children are learning. For having employed presumably competent teachers, I leave them to do what they like. I am totally responsible for their failure, what happens to the children, and their failure is proof that I was not doing M&E, namely monitoring outcomes.
And evaluation.
So we can speak, and even long before President Buhari became president, in the run-up, I remember some interventions in the media. The question about his personal Spartan life is not in doubt. But I refer to Nyerere. Nyerere was a very good man, but he ran Tanzania aground because his private goodness did not and could not translate into managing the state. So I thought I should reestablish that fact on the table that as president, he outsourced, in my view,
possibly wrong, but my view, he outsourced responsibility, and most of the things you got were just reflexes and gestures that did not show a hands-on presidency. I thought I should make that point. Now, on the current matter on the table, the first thing would be to commend the National Executive Council for being honest. This is an embarrassing thing to admit, especially given that the government in place is, if you like, an extension, if not a continuation of the previous government. Now, subsidy has come. We've always wanted a removal has come. We've always wanted a removal. And we must also be honest enough to admit that removal will have consequences. Now, these consequences wouldn't have been so bad if it was done 8, 10, 12 years ago. Now it has come. Now, the years people didn't understand it, the average man doesn't know about subsidy, its presence or not. All they know now is that fuel price has gone up. It's at our level that we are speaking of subsidy removal. What they know, government has increased fuel price. Why? Government is wicked. That's one. Two, looking at the economics of it, the expectation, remember that diesel was first deregulated. It was expected to crash, but there was political intervention. Having deregulated it, it was now left, a kind of monopoly was created. So the whole point of deregulation failed, since only one source mostly was bringing it in and determining the price. Now, I see the possibility of an oligopoly. It's deregulated, but it happens to be only the 4 of us here who sell it. And we meet among ourselves and say, well, look, oh boy, you sell at this amount. Girl, you sell at this amount. It's an oligopoly, a monopoly of those who hold custody and all of that. And that can also happen. You know, the Naira, what do you call it? The collapse of the exchange rate. It's supposed to probably bring the dollar to about 45, and Naira 40-something Naira, if you really want to talk about the influx. Look at the inflow. Now you remove subsidy. So on a weekly basis, you get several hundreds of millions of dollars in your pocket you don't have to spend. That's extra income. Now, all the others, Shell and the rest of them are bringing it in, but we could also still have an oligopoly. Since the bulk of the dollars going into the Nigerian market is coming from us, let's make sure we sell in such a way that we have excess Naira to run all our affairs in Nigeria and still post the appropriate profit. So you can, at that level, converse and maintain a much higher figure and attribute it to market forces. These are market forces. Nobody with dollar is running a charity. It's not Red Cross, it's not Red Crescent. They're out there to make profit. You can make all the preaching about national interest, but they have businesses to run and maintain.
But isn't this why it is extremely important that the NNPC is consistently involved? I mean, NNPC is already in the downstream sector, and it was saying that all of the other marketers take their price, you know, from whatever it is that the NNPC sets. You will see that band margin, usually not more than 4 Naira or 5 Naira, more than what the NNPC is selling at. Unless, of course, the NNPC has set it artificially low. Like in Lagos now, we're hearing that in some places, it's been sold for margins really wider than what the NNPC is selling at, and as a result, they're queues at NNPC stations. So, but isn't that why the intervention of the NNPC in the market is extremely important?
I think yes and no. I believe that the NNPC has been more of a disruptive, in the negative sense, influence. Remember that for months, and that's from the CBN at the time, it wasn't making dollar remittances.
Indeed.
So, what kind of renegade institution of state is that? You're the person earning the bulk income for the family and you're using it at your discretion. That's number one. So, that crisis is there that, yes, it was partly responsible for this. Secondly, you say you've removed subsidy. Now, the money that's being saved, that's why I don't understand the 800 million. You've stopped wasting money on subsidy. So that means you have money, which you can use for palliative if you want, if you're serious. My take on this is that for NNPC, I think they came out with an explanation 2 days ago by Kieri, was it? Oh, that this is why the price has gone up, market forces and the rest of it. Now, for NNPC to spearhead a hike, there's something people are not telling us.
Why do you say so? Because, I mean, as at the time this subsidy, initial subsidy was removed, the Naira had not been floated.
No, I'm discussing disparate issues that indicate a crisis. So I'm not linking the hike to Naira floating. I'm pointing out that the Naira floating has not delivered because there certainly must be forces that are out of everybody's control.
Especially in a situation where the NNPC is not even supposed to be regulating this industry based on the petroleum industry.
On the bill, yes.
The political side of it, Ayobam, let me come back to you. What's the politics in all of these things? We've not even touched what the NEC resolutions are. We're still talking about the background. So what's the politics in all of these things? The Nigerian midstream and downstream petroleum regulatory authority is supposed to be regulating all of this, but we still see the NNPC playing such a major role in this whole space.
Well, recently, I think there has been licenses given to other marketers to import, and I think I read in the news that about 3 of them are bringing in products. Probably they've just come in or they're about coming in. So we need to wait and see what is going on. And then, like I also said, I think the man running NNPC right now has questions to answer too. And I'll say it by saying a lot of money was spent on turnaround maintenances of the refinery. Why are they not working? Yeah. And he has pretended over that. I don't know why he's still in office. Honestly, I think the man needs to be questioned. I think he needs to explain to Nigeria how much has been spent on the turnaround maintenances and what has happened. Because for me, for the first time, we're going to be having a refinery that will work after a long time, and that will be a private refinery. Why don't we just sell those other ones, let them go fully private? Let's have food regulation like we've had in the diesel market, like we've had in the jet fuel market, like we've had in the kerosene market. Since we're now having food regulation in the PMS market, let the regulation be fully and total. The NNPC has proven that they are not reliable, especially when it comes to handling our refineries. People have been earning salaries for maybe 20 years now, and those refineries have not produced anything. So why do we still hold on to them? The only thing that the refinery has been doing is taking money in the name of turnaround maintenance, and we have not seen any maintenance done. So I keep saying that the leadership in those areas needs questions to be asked, and they need to answer Nigerians. But beyond that, there is hope in the sense that if some of the things that I have said are done, we will be able to see true deregulation. There will be true market forces, but Nigerians must also understand that if you are deregulating, then we are open to vagaries of the market, and I'll explain. If you follow the news in the last few days, crude oil prices have shot up to about $80 due to the issues in Ukraine, and just about 2 days ago, Russia has now said even food-bearing vessel on the Black Sea will be determined or be seen as an enemy vessel. So we are going to have more crises, not because of Nigeria, but whatever is going on in the world. So we also have to contextualize whatever is going on. That's why I'm putting all this on the table, so that you don't look at it as if it's a Nigerian issue. Because if you look at our neighboring countries, they are even buying fuel far higher than what we are buying. So it's a global issue that we must contextualize.
We will take a break, Prof. We'll take a break, we'll go, and then when we come back from the break, we'll delve into the National Economic Council's resolutions, but that we'll start off from Lagos, where our colleagues are also waiting. Just stay with us.
Welcome back. Let's expand the conversation now, shall we? We're being joined by Mr. Paul Alaje, who is a senior economist at SPM Professionals, joins us virtually from Ibadan this morning. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Paul Alaje. I can imagine that Ibadan is also like other cities where the roads are quite dry. Some have taken to trekking to their places of work, essentially a testament to the high price of petrol, the removal of a subsidy, which happened about 2 months ago. But regarding the outcome of a National Economic Council meeting, again, it's important to state that NEC is an advisory body. They essentially are meant to proffer solutions to issues, and it is now the responsibility or the job of the president to approve those recommendations and roll them out. But I'd like you to speak to a point which was made by the governor of Anambra State, Mr. Alaje, as your opening point. And he specifically talked about the states. He said if the states can afford it. He was asked, I imagine, about the palliatives, but he brought in the angle of the state. And that's contrary to what we've seen before, which is the federal government essentially being in charge of the palliatives, or at least whatever will be done with the monies budgeted for palliative. So is that a new dimension for you as well? Do you think that states should be the ones to handle whatever should be done with the palliatives?
Yeah, thank you so very much for having me, sir. I think the state can add to whatever federal government is doing. The impact is ubiquitous. It's not just per state, and it will be very difficult for us to have an homogeneous implementation if the state is managing the process. So it's important for it to be central. However, it's also good that state adds to whatever the federal government would do as per a way to reduce the impact of subsidy removal on our people. And I must also say that we want to assume that a conditional cash transfer is the best way to go. I have said it time and again, and I believe that I've had this conversation with you on a separate program where it said that conditional cash transfer has not worked around the world, especially countries with that kind of population, countries with that kind of reality, from India to China, even in Europe after the Second World War. We have seen it being practiced in Argentina, and it also failed in Argentina. At best, you are trying to hold people to a point in poverty. But when you want to really help the people, especially because World Bank is saying if we adopt this same method, we might have 7.1 million people join the poverty line. Please, you can pick up the report of World Bank 27 June 2023. World Bank is one of the proponents of conditional cash transfer. I really don't know why suddenly World Bank is now realized that if you just give cash to people without going through the process of helping them, you might have 7.1 million people join the poverty line. Not for the year, from 1st of June to the end of December. That's on one side. On the second side, recall that the same report showed that 4 million people, even in a regime where we were giving money out to people between January to the end of President Buhari's administration, we have had 4 million people join the poverty line. The question is, should we continue to do the same thing and expect a difference to come, whether at the state level or at the federal level? Or should we continue to practice the same method that is really not helping people? 5,000 naira was the subsidy removal regime. So if we're now making it 8,000, that means we're actually, in the real sense, adding 3,000 to it. And because I've been given to household before subsidy was removed. So I think there are other things. If time permits, we can extract what we think government should do that will truly have positive impact in terms of what government wants to achieve. Because when you remove subsidy, what does it mean? People's disposable income. The poor, about 65% of their income now go into transportation. That is why what you see in Lagos, what I'm seeing in Ibadan, what Mr. Ayo and our prof is seeing in Abuja, is people feel we cannot give 60% of our income. We will rather use our sweat to cover some distance. Go to Computer Village, that video trended on social media as to how people now prefer to trek because they cannot give away 60 to 65% of their income in transportation. And that does not mean that promoters are defrauding people just to make money. Price was 195. It jumped from 195 to over 600 naira within a short period of time. Even if MBS don't report what the inflation figure is, we know that the average inflation in the pocket of people has since increased beyond the 20s to 30s or 40%. But we hope that, yes, it's important government takes some policies, but the readiness of the impact and how to ameliorate the negative impact on all of this is what I hope the government of Nigeria will also be willing to do.
It's a very important point you make about that inflation, because we see the figures and then we see the reality and they don't quite match up. But let me take this to Professor Ikechukwu, because he raised an eyebrow earlier on about, the talk about, saving money from subsidies. So at least there should be some sort of money, right? But it's since been made clear that we didn't actually have the money in the first place that we're saving from subsidy. Maybe that's why we resorted to the ways and means and all of that. So when the government says we're saving money from subsidy, Perhaps they should be clearer by telling Nigerians that, well, saving does not mean that money is there that we're keeping. We didn't actually have the money, so it's money that we could have borrowed to spend on it that we're not borrowing to spend on it. And it speaks to a point, Prof. You made it last time we had this conversation about some of the policies of this government. And you sounded quite confident that this was the right path to go. But in terms of trust, communication. Don't forget, some days ago, the president had ordered that the whole gamut of the palliatives be unveiled to Nigerians. We still haven't seen even half a gamut or 10% of a gamut. We don't know what the government is doing. So are you still confident, Prof, in what this government has done or is doing so far? Are you confident, really, from the body language, the speech and the action of this government?
I'll take it from the question of the subsidy itself. Removal of subsidy, in my view, is right in the sense that the existence of the subsidy was, first of all, draining nearly all the national earnings, and secondly, in more than 80% of the states and local governments of Nigeria, nobody could buy fuel at the subsidized price. So that the claim about subsidy could not translate into the life of the people. In addition to subsidy, you have the, I think, Petroleum Equalization Fund, among other things. So it wasn't delivering. Now, moving from subsidy to palliatives is a totally different matter, because my take on palliatives from experience and even from what this government is doing if it's not careful is that we are going to end up with the same elite conspiracy where the presumed palliatives will still be cornered by the elite. They will only get richer, etc. You saw that with COVID. We saw that with fuel, petrol itself, among other things. Now, coming around to the substantive matter of the palliative questions, the intention of government is to increase the expendable income of everybody. That's what the palliative, okay, we've increased the price of fuel, so let's increase the amount of money in your hands for you to cope. And I ask the question, is it by giving people 8,000? Fortunately, it's been said that the social register needs to be reviewed. But my question is, was there even one in existence at all? Can you speak of social register in a country where there's no register of birth and no register of death? That's part of what you begin to put together to speak of a social register. You can't just spring up from the moon and speak of it. So we're only competent in compiling a list of the poor. Those are the things to raise. So coming now to the matter of the palliative and its application, one, I think we're losing time in terms of the effect on the people. Two, it is still an elite conversation. Three, nobody's looking at the multiplier effect. If you give a family 8,000 a month, and that's supposed to sort out transport, and I'm living in Gwagwalada, let's assume first, I don't want to raise the question of how you determine the families of the poor. After all, under the Ministry for Humanitarian Affairs, which I still think should be scrapped because there's NEMA and there are other agencies. Remember, we had, I think, 40 million poor that they were giving money allegedly and physically, not even by transfer, which tells you that a lot of funny things must have been going on. Now, let's assume you determine that I'm living in Gogolada, I now benefit, I get 8,000 naira. To come to work now, the same place that I used to spend about 370 naira, I spend 5,000 naira. Now, just one day of going to work, the 8,000 is gone. So this is totally unproductive. Something more sophisticated has to be thought about and done. Also, conversations need to be had. That's why you say, the president has said, unbundle it. That unbundling should also include consultation. Okay, before, there's a certain amount you pay and travel from here to Calabar, from Abuja to Calabar. Today, I understand most of the, most of the buses will take 25,000, in some cases 30 for the same distance. Now, let's do the math. I have a bus that has a tank of 75 liters. If I fill it up completely, how much will it cost me? Less than 45,000. Let's even assume it's 40,000. I go halfway, so I fill it up twice and end up spending 80,000 naira just to go one way. But in going one way, I've also collected, for that trip alone, the total amount I've collected is 250,000. So for one trip, I'm making, let's assume that 100 is on transfer. For one trip, I'm making 150,000. Now, that's 150% profit. also our what do you call it, road transport owners and road transport workers, the victims are mostly people in the class of the poor. The Okada man who drives from maybe Lube in Abuja to Galadimawa will take 1 naira. Now he's taking 3 naira. You check the volume of expenditure, he's making 3 times the amount of fuel spent for the same distance. So it is true that it's gone up, but the bulk of the punishment is coming from unthought through arbitrary decisions by actors. So the increment, if you're making 150 on a trip, it means that if you make 100, it won't kill you. It means that if you make 70, in the past it used to be 30, it won't kill you. But you insist on making 150, who is paying the 150? Not your governor, is your neighbor, etc. So there has to be a national conversation about steps need to be taken for mutual protection and general survival. We're focusing too much on the fact of, oh, there's a fuel increase. The criminality we are internalizing. Of course, they are understandable too. Acts of desperation. Look, let me see what I can do for myself. This government and all governments don't care about me. So you also now have that renegade social orientation that's creating more hardship than would have been the case. Imagine that this thing happened and conversations were had, discussions were made on this route, they will seem a reasonable figure, what do you think, etc. I believe that should have been part of the conversation. So to round up on the issue you raised, we need to make a distinction between the fact of removing subsidy that wasn't impacting lives, or rather removing the claim there's subsidy for which money was being taken, and the question of managing the outcome where salaries are not rising, food prices are rising, transport costs are rising. You're not, if you get 1 children, okay, parents don't pay school fees, that gives them more money. Stop paying taxes for 6 months, that gives them more money. But 8,000, let's get real.
That's a big question, Professor Okechukwu, and, you know, pretty much that was where we started off from when Nyota was saying that, look, if we're making more from revenue collected by the FIRS, there should be some accountability from government, you know, to tell Nigerians what this goes to. And that's where I'm headed as I come to you, Mr. Oyalowo. Recall when the president announced, you know, that big bang, that subsidy is gone. You know, the NNPCL CEO also came, you know, on live television, in fact, on our sister program, to say that, as a matter of fact, subsidy had not been paid, taken responsibility for by the federal government since 2016, and it was the corporation that was taking responsibility for paying that subsidy. And tie that now to the chairman of the Governors Forum, Senator Hope Uzodimma, who says now that states now have increased allocation following the removal of subsidy. I'm just wondering, is there accountability, you know, from government in that regard? If government had not been taking responsibility for subsidy since 2016, how has the monies been spent since that time? Mr. Oyalowo, that's for you.
I think you got that part of responsibility wrong. What NNPC was saying is not government not taking responsibility. Actually, they were doing something they call crude swap. So rather than NNPC selling, they were doing swap, so they were not remitting any money into the coffers of the government. That is not to say I'm defending the NNPC. I've already told the world right here my thought on what should happen to
what he said was quite clear. Mr. Oyalowo, what Mr. Kyari said was quite clear, that the government had not been paying the subsidy, had been defaulting on, you know, payment of subsidy over a period of time. Yeah. Unless you are giving that interpretation.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm also saying that aside from government not paying, NNPC had been the one in the forefront, and like I said clearly, NNPC has been badly managed, and the people managing it have a lot of questions to answer. But I also want to do a little bit of walk back. Paul is my good friend. We've squared up in a few times. But I see him mention all the problems. He hasn't given one single solution. At least Prof has tried to say, let's do this, let's do this. So I want many of us, analysts, economists, and everybody, don't just talk about the problems. What exactly should be the solution? Everybody has killed the 8,000 naira palliative that was planned, and the government has decided to review it, which is good. However, I want to take a little bit of a different position in that. I think when they are talking about 8,000, Prof, is not for people like me and you. We don't need the 8,000. it is for people. If you go to villages and some other areas, there are some people that maybe 1,000 could look like ₦1,000,000 to them because they don't even have anything. So clearly, there must be a review, but I don't think the 8,000 is for some of us who have telephones, who have cars, who can go. Some people don't. I know people in areas, when I was doing my campaigns in villages, who don't enter vehicles. They trek from every point in their life. So those kind of people, 8,000 might mean a lot to them. But the problem here is, will they get the money? So that is why the registers must be well thought out, must be well compiled. However, I also disagree with homogeneity, like Paul said earlier on. We don't the problem of the man in Damaturu is not the same problem with of the man in Anambra. So I think the states must be more involved, and every state should devise what they think their people really need. This homogeneity is the reason why we are where we are. You cannot say what is going on in Sokoto must be what will go on in Ibadan, because the problem of the man in Sokoto is not the exact problem of the man in Ibadan. Yes, everybody must eat. So this is where I think the state must be more involved, because each state should be able to devise a means to touch the lives of their people. The federal government should only be there to give backings to whatever the states are doing. So we must remove this idea of let's centralize everything. This centralization is what built this monster that we've been dealing with. So I think the states should do more to touch the lives of the people. Man, to answer your question, on government defaulting, that is why I said earlier on, questions must be asked and people must be made to face the consequences of the action. If truly there have been default, who have been those people who were responsible for the default? Have there been reason for default? Is there genuine, or was there some funny business that has gone on? So those are the reasons why I called earlier on that people who have been put in offices to do jobs should be brought to come and answer questions on, this was your responsibility, how did you handle it? So for me, there is no need to hide anything to protect anyone. If you are been in an office and people have reasons to ask you questions, then you should be asked questions. Unfortunately, when you ask them questions, the same Nigerians are the ones who will be saying, leave him alone. I know somebody who has been suspended, who is now facing the law. I've seen a lot of questions online. Why is he the only one? Why is he not from this area? Why is this? So even when you say people should be questioned, the same people who are supposed to be the victims will be the one carrying placard and say, leave our son alone. So maybe we don't even want accountability in the real sense. We just want to be the ones that partake in the sharing and the looting.
The questions are being asked of the administration of the APC, and which, you know, has pretty much been extended because it's still an APC administration. So it places a huge question on accountability of the ruling party. But your disagreement over homogeneity, you know, is still subject to further debate, because hunger and the need for transportation knows no region or state of the federation. It's it's a similar problem across states. But I wonder if we're paying close attention to the governor of Anambra State yesterday, when he was saying that, the figures for palliatives being bandied about, are not exactly what would apply, that states will have to pay based on what they can afford. I'm wondering if we should ask questions of the governors, of whether they would administer it as judiciously as possible, because the concern, according to analysts, I listened to Senator Shehu Sani speaking on our sister program yesterday, that there are some states that have inherited debts. There are some states owing contractors. I'm coming to you now, Professor Ikechukwu. Can we rely on the governors to administer the palliatives as judiciously as possible?
The answer is no, from experience. And in speaking of experience, we're not just talking about COVID. I've had cause to be involved in some development and capacity and empowerment programs for 1 or 2 states. The first one was the one that woke me up to the reality, and I'm talking about more than 10 years ago, but within this democratic enterprise. The trainings and everything had been concluded, and so the government was taking time in giving the participants what they needed. Then one morning, while we were fortunately we were in a meeting, I got a call from somebody who say, well, sir, it's one of those who took part in so and so. Oga, we know you're in Abuja, but this is how we do it here. We're not very greedy. So if you can tell them, they've said they're giving us so and so amount. If we can arrange it, for somebody like me, I don't mind taking half. We believe that this will make it move faster. I was speechless. I called the governor and told. Before the governor, I spoke to the commissioner, a commissioner who was related to the. He laughed for a long time. He said, Doc, welcome to the club. That if you call these children and give them 30% of that value, then they will not tell anybody. I said they will not complain. They said yes. I was baffled, so I then told the governor. But eventually they got what they were. So the point I'm making with that is that, yes, my colleague here has said correctly that the 8,000 naira is not for people like us. I agree. Even the example I gave is some people who live in far-flung areas. But I wonder why National Assembly members will be getting palliatives, people who are already overpaid, who, if they are serious about Nigeria, should cede half of their salary and we make the sitting part-time. So coming to the substantive matter of the credibility, that's why I say let's look at records. The Empower program, you will find in states where those who were given the responsibility simply compiled names of those they know. So you can't fault the decision in Abuja at the time or the concept notes for the program, but the administration was eaten up by the politics, corruption, and social realities of the Nigerian state. Having said that there will be a question of integrity, that's not enough reason to shut it down. You can't say that, okay, when you go to a motor park and bring food, that the people there don't observe table manners, therefore stop them. No, provide the food. So the involvement of the state, maybe initially it will be totally, it will be largely subject to question. It may suffer integrity issues, but that not go on forever. Societal evolution means that at some point you take a beating, you go into a class where the children are used to being rowdy. They've been rowdy for 9 months of the session. You're just a newly employed principal, and you expect that by the very next day, everybody will come out talking his shit. No, you make your gains instrumentally. So to finalize on the question, on the issue raised, the state should be involved. There's nobody who is an indigent or who is a, what you might call it, who is taken care of personally or directly by the federal government. If you look at the UBE program, Universal Basic Education, the commission relates with states. There's no primary school owned by the federal government. So yes, with all the corruption, with all the distortions, you can then migrate it to a federal government that has no access. When I say no access, absolutely no access. That's why the miracle of distributing money physically during COVID, when those who went to distribute it should ordinarily have died if they actually carried out the assignment. So yes, please, the state should be involved. The governors should take more responsibility. It will also help them to secure better statistics about their people, whether poor or not. But more importantly, I believe all states, with this talk about social register, which is a purely, in my view, imaginary claim, will need to now have birth, registration of birth, formally and extended and all the way down, because most Nigerians are born in localities, not in Abuja, not in state capitals. Register of death, it will be difficult, but you begin with that. Then you begin to take inventory from employment, from admissions into all kinds of levels of education, and then integrate. That's why you have a social register.
Okay, Prof, this conversation around the social register, some will say there's really no way we can talk about a social register when the identification numbers that are supposed to go to all Nigerians cannot really, that data has not really been said. Okay, so far, yes. I understand just about 100 million have their name, and even at that, some of it is not even authenticated because they're still going back and forth. But let's go to Mr. Laje. This matter, amongst the things that the council resolved on, there was this part about cutting cost of governance. The concern here is also about the fact that there were no specifics in terms of like, this is where we are cutting costs, these are the areas we need to cut costs, this aspect of government or this arm of government you need to cut down on this side or cut down on that side. So let's begin from that side. Cutting cost of governance. At what point should state and federal, where should they start from?
Very much once again. Over the years, government has tried to remove subsidy, and because of distrust in the people, in the government, people have always said no. President Tinubu perhaps is the first leader in recent time that did not have this resistance when it comes to subsidy removal. So, what I was expecting would be that state government, perhaps NEC, after the meeting, would say, in order for us to identify with people, we are cutting down all our costs. I don't know if you can hear me. In order to identify with people, we are cutting down all our costs by 1/3. Say remuneration, allowances, benefits, everything going down by 1/3. That is 1/3 of all monies that should go to government, or those that are representative of us in government, including the National Assembly and the executive, we go down by 1/3. That will put confidence in people. Because here is it. When government says, tighten your belt, even though the belt is old, meanwhile, their own is not tightened at all. What we have seen is about billions of naira going to the National Assembly, and people wonder, it's the same country. How would we, even though government has explained that the money will not exactly be for palliative, the challenge I have with that is the timing of when that appropriation is coming. I would need to quickly respond to my brother, my friend, Mr. Oyalowo, who said, oh, Paul Alaje is my friend. I'm happy he's not leaving the studio today, by the way, because we are meeting again. At least he's still seated in Abuja. Here is it. Some of the recommendation we have made. I've made recommendation even President Tinubu came to office. And I've mentioned that President Tinubu, before he removes subsidy, must ensure refinery works. The refineries are not working. Let me tell you this. FX was at official window was 461. It has grown to about 700 or 800, depending on the market you want to adopt. That is why PMS increased. It is not the forces of demand and supply. It is because at which marketers are bringing PMS has increased. It's not forces of demand and supply. If you devalue again, ready to pay more for PMS, because we have to. But for some reasons, we are just unable to refine it. So if we make refinery work, what is the real solution? Not palliative, that all our attention will be diverted. Make the refinery work. It would increase, but there will be some level of stability. Okay. Instead of government saying it wants to give to people, government can also give to people.
We have to start winding down. If you can hear me, we have to start winding down. You brought up the matter of the crude oil, and we had a conversation here one time where one of our guests gave us a breakdown of what could happen if Nigeria decides to refine its own crude. It says that barrel that is sold at over just about $70 per barrel. From that barrel, the byproduct of refining that product could give Nigeria as much as $2,000 for that one barrel that we have. But let's come back this way. He's mentioned, as we wind down, our closing thoughts here, he's mentioned the need for the government in the conversation or in the bid to show the people that this, we understand your plight. Subsidy is gone, and so we want you to tighten your belt, even though the belt is old. But we are also tightening our belt, so we're cutting down our costs across board by 1/3. Both of you can answer to this question real quick. Please keep it short. Is it possible, and how quickly can that happen?
I don't have a problem with government cutting down costs. The problem I have with people who have been saying government should cut down costs have not been specific to which area exactly should they cut down. Because if you are looking at it, are we supposed to sack civil servants so that we reduce the cost of salaries? Or what exactly are we cutting? So, yes, I completely agree with those who have said government should cut down costs, but I'm still asking them, where exactly? That is why I keep saying that when you are making this recommendation, be specific.
If you agree, what parts of government
I'm not being the advocate of that, but I agree with them. I'm just agreeing with them.
So what areas would you say?
They are the ones who wanted it. They should tell us the areas.
In specific terms, there's something government spends on. When a governor appoints 8,000 aides, he's not helping either himself or the state. He's wasting money. Soludo walked in as governor and inherited a cleaning cost of 115 or thereabouts million. Cleaning, general cleaning of State House, government services. As I'm talking to you, the cost is at 11 million. So all state governments are capable of reviewing the wastes, which often is caused by political baggage. Look, I have 27 people. Okay, I'll name them essay. And I'll be giving them 500 or 250 every month, which they share with the organ. That's one. Then the volume of your convoy gets sophisticated. You have your press crew, right? As a governor, you're traveling. That includes the cameraman, the videographer, the reporter, on the whole about 5, 6 people, and the still photographer. Can you condense it in this age of miniaturization? Yes, because you have equipment, and that's why I don't like to, you see I keep bringing up Peter. Peter will travel with 2 people. One of them has the capacity, he can interview you and record you. He can do it. So there's 5 people standing there at the cost of 1 person, and as the others are quarreling that, oh, the reporter has not sent in the report, his own has gone out. No, now, so that's it. Then the size of your convoy, then your fuel consumption, then your self-administration. I was going to say to Minister of Transport, Ojo Maduekwe, 3rd time I traveled, the 3rd time ever after joining, I traveled with him to Lagos, the laundry bill, this is 2001, the laundry bill was in excess of 120,000 for 3 nights, even he was servicing the whole of Ikeja. So what happens, the minister checks into the hotel, and some parastatal protocol staff who facilitate it, of course, you won't go to be checking. People will bring in their laundry, they'll go and sign to the minister's room. So they should employ aides who have capacity for detail. With that, so I just, once we check in, I walk in, I say, I look for the banquet manager, I look for this. This is number of people in this room. Please clear anybody who is going for buffet with me. Then laundry, there's no laundry from the minister's office, minister's room or mine, except, or any other aides that we came with, except is this and that. Now, that is attention to public administration. Maintenance costs must be reviewed. If you outsource maintenance, because every car has a maintenance manual, I bought an SUV for 90 million. I know that it takes, you must do 25,000 kilometers, no matter how you're doing, before you change the brake pads. I know I will not go and buy a funny oil, I buy mobile one, which means you must do between 10 and 12,000 before you change the oil. When they come back after 3 months, oh, got this one, brain box problem. Solution is simple, have the fellow arrested. Get a competent engineer who knows that you use the manual to maintain your vehicle. You don't need to have pay a visit, for instance, to the mechanic for repair. So all of that, it's about detail. It's about understanding the value of public expense, etc.
And in the base of that, we'll be able to cut down all the costs.
Absolutely.
And not exceed our time limit, even as we speak.
You're cutting down time now, not cost.
We have exceeded the time and all of that. Thank you so much for coming in this morning, Professor Oke Ikechukwu, Executive Director, Development Specs Academy, Ayobami Oyalowo, who's a development economist, a member of the All Progressives Congress.
Thank you.
And the man that joined us virtually, Mr. Paul Alaje, Senior Economist, SPM Professionals. Thank you all for coming in this morning and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Sunrise Daily will be back in a moment. Don't go away.
Yes, that's what we turn our attention to right now. The Super Falcons had a match just a few hours ago. I bet you were probably sleeping while that match was on. Interesting match, I must say. So let's get right into it. As you can see, we're being joined by Mr. Kunle Sholaja, who's a publisher, Sports Village Square, and a veteran sports journalist, joins us right here in our studios. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, thank you very much.
You know, this is one of those tournaments you have to stay up. I mean,
3:30
a.m. Your morning starts literally from that period. But the match has been played. Yeah. Nigeria against Canada. Some made a joke that it was Nigeria against Nigerians in Canada or some sort. But that aside, the match ended 0-0. But let's begin with your general perception of the quality of this tournament. It's the FIFA Women's World Cup. A lot of people might be comparing this, as you would expect, to the Men's World Cup. But from what you've seen, the few matches played so far, how would you rate the quality of this World Cup in Australia and New Zealand?
Certainly this is a World Cup with a difference, apart from the fact that it's the first to be co-hosted by 2 countries. Mm-hmm. It's an expanded World Cup, and it appears from the results so far will be the keenest ever. If you remember, I was in China 1991 at the inaugural edition. Score lines were heavy, 4-0, 9-0, 8-0. But you could see now that the score lines are coming down, which means the competition is becoming more and more keen. And teams that hitherto were not interested in women football, who just probably saw women football as maybe something like a novel, have now come to see that women football has come to stay. And now we have professional women footballers. And they are doing very well. In this competition now, you have 40-year-old playing. And what does that mean? It means that those women must be very strong. As a matter of fact, Christy Sinclair, who played for Canada in the match that just ended some few hours ago, is a record holder in terms of the number of goals she has scored. She has scored over 190 international goals. What that means is that when you compare, each squad has 23 players. So if you aggregate all the goals scored by 23 players in 21 of the countries, there were still 21 goals combined behind what one person has scored.
You know, now that you put it that way, it really places it. But we have our record holders as well, on maybe. Even as a team, I mean, we've not missed, as far as I know, we've not missed any of the competitions. Am I correct?
We are the only country in Africa that has been ever present since the competition started.
So we can hold on to those records ourselves.
We can hold on to that.
But let's talk about this match. A lot of people had predicted the scoreline, maybe from what they saw in the opening match. So maybe they weren't expecting something quite different, like a wide margin, let me say, in the score. But 0-0, a penalty was missed. Nigeria got a red card. How would you rate that match you just saw? There were high expectations, Oshola and the rest. What was your rating of that match?
It was a thrilling match. And I also want to say that the benches of the two teams actually worked. Because sometimes like this, you pull the strings from the bench. From the onset, I've been one-on-one and looking at the quality of each squad, the Canadians were better. So, and what happens if you have a good coach? Once you know that a team is better than you, what you try to do, you know you'll be under pressure, you soak that pressure, and then you make occasional foray up front. And in one of those instances, you may be lucky to get the goal.
We got a shot on target, actually.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we got more shots on target than Canada because it was all pressure, but with little attempt at goal. You get the point? So that's where, for the first time, I think Randy Waldrum got it this time because he actually absorbed the pressure. In the first 20-30 minutes of that match, it was Canada all the way. And it was after 30 minutes, the Nigerian players started coming up front. Unfortunately, Oshoala, who's the star person there, didn't have anybody to back up. And then you must also give credit to that young teenager who unfortunately got that red card. Debbie Abiodun. As stunning as she was, she held that midfield. Indeed. And the VAR-induced red card that she got was just quite unfortunate. It just reminded me of what happened to Alex Iwobi in the match against Tunisia. And again, and that's one thing, I don't want to take anything away from the officials. There were two instances, too, that I had expected a VAR review, which would have also led to at least 2 red cards to the Canadian. One was actually minutes after Abiodun had been red carded. Once you stamp on the foot of a fellow player, it is taken as a career-threatening injury if that person is injured. And that was why that red card. It may look something very casual, but the VAR called the attention.
And the rules are the rules anyway.
And the rules are the rule. But I would have expected the VAR to have spotted those 2 instances. But then we are all human.
Well, it's interesting listening to you analyze the match. It, pretty much suggests, hints about the variations in opinions, about soccer. Particularly because some of the reviews... Football. Some of the
Canadians, we call it
soccer. I know, that was
great. But particularly because some of the reviews I have read, attribute words like sloppy, cagey match, and very few outperformers in the match. But you have said that, for the Nigerians to be able to stave off goals from excellent players like, what's the name of it? Sinclair. So what for you, should the team have done, particularly some names that were also bandied as expecting to give Nigeria strong lead, names like Wama Dike, Oshoala, Osieme, did they perform to expectation for you?
Yeah, they did as a team. And don't also forget the antecedent of this team. They've had 7 matches losing streak, so to say. As a matter of fact, until last March or so, the last match they won was against Cameroon, the match that actually qualified them for this tournament. That was their last match. Every other matches they played, they were losing. And that gave us a lot of concern. And looking at that team too, during the Women African Nations Cup in Morocco last year, we knew that that team was aging. And that is the fear I have now. And that's where I felt a bit compassionate about Abiodun. She's just 19 years old. That's a player that we look forward to in future. Most of these players, this may just be the end of their World Cup.
Their last major tournament.
Their last major tournament. Some of them might still make the Women African Nations Cup in Morocco again next year. But most of them, because they are aging. And unfortunately for us in Nigeria here, most of those players are offshore players. They are all based abroad. Very few are in Nigeria. Unlike what we have some 15, 20 years ago, when virtually all our national team players were homegrown. But you look at women football in Nigeria, it is going down. You can count them on your fingers, the number of women football teams that are actually in existence. Unlike some 20 years ago, when you even have private individuals. You have the Kakanfo Queens, owned by Simbiat Abiola. You have the Sugar Babes. You have the Jegede Babes. You have the Omidiran Babes. But because we didn't really pay attention to women football, that's why most of these teams die. You even see some teams being walked over in their own home game because they could not raise a team, they could not pay the players, and we also know that women football in Nigeria still doesn't attract a crowd. As a matter of fact, it was a big credit for Morocco last year that all the matches were attracting a huge crowd. I later went to Morocco and I found out what was the matter. They only started their women league just 6 years ago. We have started our own as far back as 1989. They started their own, and they focused on something that we want to be the best in Africa and one of the best in the world. What did they do? They picked players. Some of the players in clubs in Morocco, for instance, I know of Sporting Casablanca, a women football club in Morocco. They have players from some of these countries that have talented players, and they are grooming them. Each of those girls is being paid $1,000 every month. Something that even our own professional men footballers don't earn here. And where you don't invest, you can't expect to harvest. So and according to the sporting director of that club, he said they were getting subvention from the government through the Football Federation because they knew that these players will ultimately form the national team. And if you don't invest in them, you can't have a quality national team.
So if the Falcons have performed well under the circumstances, do you think that those other reviews of the match being sloppy are jaundiced?
They are jaundiced because one thing is this: it's like Nigeria facing Argentina now. No matter how skillful our players are, or Brazil, you expect there will be that stage fright. There are some facts that precede a match. You know that one-on-one, this match is stronger. And what do you do? Just like when you are playing a game of chess, you begin to anticipate what are the likely actions of my opponent, and how do I do to counter them? And how do I now? And there is no team that is 100% very strong. How do I exploit the weaknesses of that team? So, and that's where you say, okay, we know we are not that strong, but what we do is this: let's do mass attack, mass defense. But you must give something to them. That match was their 27th match in World Cup history. And it's the first time they will be playing a goalless draw. And Canada, despite the hype about Canada, I tell you one thing, Canada has never defeated Nigeria in the World Cup.
Yet another bragging rights. You know, it's funny. Canada, they won the Olympics, right? They're Olympics champions. They are ranked top 10. Nigeria is 40th. So, I mean, on a lot of sides, this was perhaps a good match. But in less than a minute, let's talk about this Randy Waldrum matter. You know, before the tournament, there was the back and forth. I don't know if it's been resolved. Perhaps you have inside details. But do you see this affecting the team, the tournament, further into this competition?
Well, it may not, because first and foremost, the players too, they want to make names for themselves. They also hope to use this stage, the World Cup stage. That's where you are exposed to the whole world. Everybody in the world is watching. And you don't, because maybe I have one grudge or the other against the Football Federation, I'm not going to give my all the best that can come from me. It will ultimately also affect those players.
Right.
Yeah. So because of that, I still believe that after the tournament, they can always resolve this.
It looks like we'll be having you again, but we have to anchor at this point. We look forward to the next match. Mr. Kunle Sholaja, publisher, Sports Village Square, veteran sports journalist. Thank you so much for your time.
It's always a pleasure being here.
So, well, something to look forward to, at least amidst all of this. We have the Super Falcons making Nigeria proud. We have comments and emails from you. Let's begin with this one on fuel subsidy from Abiru. Kenneth says the palliative, right? Okay. Let's begin with a tweet from Sammy, rather. Talks about when diesel price went up to 700 naira later, I bought a petrol generator and switched to a petrol generator to run my business office. Now petrol has increased. What do I switch to now? Tough, very tough situation. That's a real life experience.
Well, looks like LPG is being considered now. Some are making transitions from fuel to LPG for their generators. But, you know, there are also other safety concerns where that is, you know, being chosen as an alternative. This one is from Abiru Kenneth, and he says, palliative, no doubt, is necessary and urgent, but the attitude of the National Assembly is worrisome. Nigeria should be fixed as soon as possible. Nigerians are tired of grammar.
Well, yeah, that's what we call Dogo Torrenti. Nobody wants Dogo Torrenti anymore. Action. Well, this is from Abayomi Bolaji. He says the government should focus on privatization of our refineries to curb corruption and endless cost of maintenance. Repairing it to cushion the effect of fuel subsidy removal will pave way for more of the so-called elite to exploit this avenue. Government should only control the supply of crude to these refineries.
And then this one, again, staying on the fuel subsidy removal. My submission is that the voters' card should largely be used and the BVN and NAIN should also be explored, or else so many people will not be able to access this palliative. Each of these mediums has its advantage and disadvantages. That's coming from Yakubu Musa Dang. And those interesting comments, and indeed everyone will be having one reason or the other, or one suggestion or the other, how government should go about this. At the end of the day, it's just so that every citizen will get to maybe experience a bit of this palliatives and this times area. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of your day and the week. My name is Neota Igbi.
It'd be interesting if government had a way of collating some of the suggestions that citizens are offering and seeing really what's workable. Some are even saying reduce electricity tariff, pay electricity bills. Now, how that will work is unclear. But thank you so much for these suggestions and for sending them this morning. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf, wishing you a very wonderful weekend, nonetheless.
As much as you can.
And, you know, just a reminder that while they are trying to look for other ways to come up with a more authentic register, the Nigerian poor are looking for space to breathe. Thank you so much for allowing us share your Friday morning with you. Have a wonderful weekend. I am Bukola Koka.
And I'm Kaodo Kikulu. Goodbye.